Excellencies, dear colleagues, good afternoon to who is with us at the International Environment House, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to who is with us on WebEx or is now watching the video of the event. The Geneva Environment Network in Switzerland have the pleasure to welcome you today to celebrate World Environment Day in Geneva, and as we start World Environment Week around the world. In the lead up to Stockholm Plus 50, we are celebrating today the historic decision taken by the Human Rights Council to recognize the right to a healthy environment, its role in advancing the environmental agenda, and the road to the United Nations Environment Assembly after the Human Rights Landmarker Resolution. Before we proceed with the opening remarks of this event, and I hand over to the moderator of today's journey, let me remind for those who are online with us that you can raise your questions by using the Q&A box, which we will address in the discussion session of this event. To launch and moderate this event, it is my pleasure to give the floor to Mariana Bolshakova, Unep Environmental Law and Governance Coordinator for the Pan-European region. Mariana, over to you.
Thank you very much, and it's very much a pleasure to be here and to moderate such a distinguished event with such a distinguished panel. In the introduction, I just want to take you a little bit on the history discourse of where we are and how we got here, because this week we also, and these two weeks, we celebrate the 50 years of advancement in international environmental governance. And 50 years ago, in 1972, in Stockholm, the countries got together for the first time to recognize environment as a global issue that needs to be addressed. At that conference, they adopted a declaration, and I want to quote to you from that declaration. It said, "Man has a fundamental right to freedom, equality, and adequate conditions of life in an environment of equality that permits a life of dignity and well-being, and he bears the solemn responsibility to protect and improve the environment for present and future generations." So already 40 years ago, we were very much forward-looking to the problems that we are facing today. This conference influenced legal and institutional development for the next decades, and also was one of the influences in the creation of the UN Environment Programme. But it was also a starting point for the development of a series of environmental agreements and processes that guide all of our work today at the international level. 20 years after that, in Rio, we had a whole series of treaties developed that deal with issues like climate, something that is increasingly a problem we face today, biodiversity laws, desertification, and other issues. There was also a declaration adopted at Rio, and that defined core principles that guide international environmental law and governance today. It may not have defined environmental rights as such, but it gave birth to a lot of processes that started that recognition, including things like the Aarhus Convention that we have in the Pan-European region, and the Escazú agreement that was recently developed in Latin America. So it did take us a little bit step forward. In this intervening decades, we've had some big progress in recognizing environmental rights in the constitutions of countries at the national level. But this progress has been a little bit slower at the international level. And interestingly enough, in the absence of this regulatory framework, the courts stepped in and have been very creative in defining the link between fundamental rights and the growing environmental problems by relying on the international framework they had before them, and that is right to life, right to privacy, right to property, and so on. But this issue is coming back and keeps coming back because the impact of environmental degradation and the triple planetary crisis on the present, and especially and increasingly on the future generations, is more and more serious and more evident. So in response to this, we also had some actions at the UN, and the recent UN Secretary General call for action on human rights also addresses issues of climate and human rights, the situation of environmental defenders, and the rights of future generations. But a big breakthrough we had last year was the adoption by the Human Rights Council of the declaration recognizing the right to a healthy environment. Now, that recognition is non-binding, so we are still and the process and going forward. And there is a huge work to be done within the human rights framework. But we are on the right path, and we just need to move and walk a little bit faster, because millions of lives and livelihoods and the well-being of future generations are truly at stake. So the work that is going on around the General Assembly to give this right a formal recognition is immensely important, and the events like the one today are an important step on that path. Before I open the floor for a very distinguished panel today, I would like to conclude with a quote from our executive director that she gave just last week on this issue in an interview. And what she said basically sums it up. The right to a clean and healthy environment matters because it compels governments, businesses, and institutions to respect, protect, and fulfill that right. Enforcing this right could change so much. It could reduce pollution, which affects human health and is a significant cost to health systems. It could protect environmental defenders and indigenous people from persecution. It could make our cities more livable. Guaranteeing the right to a clean and healthy environment could change everything. And with that, I would like to give the floor to the first member of our distinguished panel, His Excellency Ambassador Felix Willman, who is the Deputy Permanent Representative of Switzerland to the United Nations Office and other international organizations in Geneva, and the Permanent Representative of Switzerland to the Conference on Disarmament. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. And good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all of you, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you today to celebrate the World Environment Day. It's in fact quite a tradition here in Geneva to celebrate this day here in the premises of the International Environment House. A tradition that we lost somehow a bit during the pandemic, but that used to gather many people around this important day. Today I think most of you are still in a virtual way, but at least we are meeting again. So I'm really glad about this. Let me also take the opportunity to thank the Geneva Environment Network for all the work that you have done for setting up this event today, and of course also all the fellow panelists for participating in today's discussion. Now, as was already said by both Mariana and Diana, so I will be very short. This, of course, it's a landmark week this week with the 50 years of the Stockholm Declaration, a journey actually that started in Geneva in the early 70s. Leading to Stockholm, which then, of course, in turn again was a kind of starting point to then the right to a healthy environment that was finally adopted in October, on the 8th of October last year in the Human Rights Council. So I'm really glad to pronounce a few opening remarks on that occasion. So, ladies and gentlemen, the imminent threat we are facing and which needs the full attention and action of every one of us is the triple planetary crisis of climate, pollution, and biodiversity loss. Not only does it affect the life and human rights of this generation, but also of future ones. Time is running, and we need to act now to protect people and nature. Ever since its first resolution on human rights and the environment back in 2011, the Human Rights Council has built a consensus of the international community that environmental protection and the protection of human rights cannot be achieved without each other. This also reflects the interdependence and the indivisibility of the human rights that Switzerland promotes at national and international levels. In recent years, humanity has been facing unprecedented challenges in the face of environmental degradation. How can we still guarantee the right to water when global warming increases droughts in numerous regions of the world? How can we deal with the vicious circle that our food system is the main cause of biodiversity loss, but also that biodiversity loss in turn negatively affects the right to food? And how can we address the challenges that air pollution poses to the right of health? These issues need to be addressed. The world is waiting for answers. And the human rights system is capable of being part of the solution. And this is why the UN Secretary General, various UN agencies, special rapporteurs, and more than 1,000 civil society organizations have called for the universal recognition of a human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. After broad consultations and intense negotiations, a core group comprised of Costa Rica, the Maldives, Morocco, Slovenia, and Switzerland introduced a resolution in the Human Rights Council in October last year that recognized this right for the first time at a global level. The resolution was co-sponsored by 78 states and represents an international milestone for human rights and environmental law. Although not legally binding, as has been said before by Mariana, it sends nevertheless out a very important political signal. The international community agreed to respond to the growing impact of environmental degradation on human rights. So the UN and over 150 states recognize such a right. That's, as we said, is an important step. But it's not the end of the story, of course. The human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment raises several complex questions. One being what is the scope and the extent of this right? But also, what has this right meant in those countries or those constituencies where it is already recognized at the national or at the regional level? And third, what are the implications of UN recognition of the right, both nationally and internationally? To discuss these issues, Switzerland, together with Liechtenstein and the Universal Rights Group, organized a retreat close to Geneva, precisely on this issue, the so-called Glion retreat a few days ago, on the 16th and the 17th of April. And we're glad that more than 60 representatives of states, international organizations, NGOs, but also experts took part in this retreat. And the topics discussed were precisely the scope of the right, which was recognized by the HRC, the impact it had where it was already recognized in national legislation, and what the Human Rights Council, or more generally, let's say the UN system recognition could mean in the future. The discussions helped to better understand the right and to brainstorm on the future of this right. And actually, many participants argued that the scope of the right was already quite clear, as it was based on years of research, of interpretations by treaty bodies and also by special rapporteurs, by national practices and other legal instruments. However, there were also a few participants who questioned the value of the right recognized by the Human Rights Council, as the scope of this right, according to them, was not yet clear enough. But most participants agreed that the discussions around the newly recognized right helped to further clarify its scope, a trend that certainly would continue with a recognition by the UN General Assembly. And I think that's a bit where we are now, and the core group, of which, well, the Maldives and Switzerland, as I said before, are a part of. I think we're now working on this process to submit the recognition of the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment to the UN General Assembly. Discussions are ongoing as we speak within the core group. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, with this, I'm confident that meetings and sessions like the opportunity that we have today to gather over the right open a space for an informal exchange, for a platform to considering the questions I mentioned and others beyond that in a neutral and an inclusive way. And so in this sense, I'm looking forward to a fruitful discussion, and I would like to thank you so much for your participation, your interest, and your attention. And before handing over the floor back to Mariana, let me just apologize for the fact that I will have to leave somewhat earlier, a bit before the end of this session. So the floor is, I'll hand over the floor back to you, Mariana.
Thank you, Your Excellency, and also big thanks to Switzerland for continuing its engagement within the core group, but also taking the leadership on these expert discussions like the one in Gleon. That's crucial. And of course, another member state that has been instrumental with the others in the core group in advancing this issue is Maldives, and it's my honor to give the floor to His Excellency Ambassador Asim Ahmed, who's a permanent representative of the Republic of Maldives to the United Nations Office and other international organizations in Geneva. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mariana. Excellencies, colleagues, at the outset, allow me to express my appreciation to the United Nations Environment Programme, the Geneva Environment Network, and other organizers for convening this important and timely event. In a few days, Stockholm Plus 50 high-level international meeting will commemorate 50 years since the adoption of the 1972 Stockholm Declaration. This is a truly momentous occasion. The Conference on the Human Environment, held in Stockholm in 1972, made the environment an urgent global issue for the first time. Over the last 50 years, we have learned much about the nexus between environment and human development. Today, the world is facing several global crises related to our environment, such as climate change, pollution and waste, and the loss of nature and biodiversity. Today, we are also increasingly cognizant of the interlinkages between environment and human security, where habitat loss, food insecurity, and poverty have important implications for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Climate change is one of the greatest threats to the full enjoyment of human rights due to its devastating impacts on our lives and overall well-being. We in the Maldives live day in, day out with the constant threat of climate change. Back in 1989, with the assistance of the Commonwealth Secretariat and the Australian government, the Maldives hosted the first ever small states conference on sea level rise, bringing together several small island developing states. In that conference, we adopted the Malay Declaration on sea level rise and global warming. This declaration already warned in 1989 that sea level rise could cause considerable damage to the land and infrastructure of these countries and even threaten the very survival of some island states. The Malay Declaration laid the foundation for the formation of the Alliance of Small Island States, AOSIS. Then in 2008, our current Foreign Minister, His Excellency Abdullah Shahid, in his address at the high-level segment of the 7th session of the Human Rights Council, put forward the case to examine the negative impacts of climate change on the full enjoyment of human rights. This has led to efforts by like-minded states to subsequently establish the mandate of the independent expert on human rights and environment, and later renamed as Special Rapporteur on the issues of human rights obligations relating to the enjoyment of a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. His Excellency Abdullah Shahid, Minister of Foreign Affairs in his capacity as the current 76th President of the UN General Assembly, reminds us that climate change is not a distant threat, but a crisis on our doorstep. The high-level thematic debate entitled Delivering Climate Action for People, Planet and Prosperity, convened by the President of the GA, highlights the urgency of scaling up climate action to achieve the 1.5 degrees target, and in order to ensure that climate change remains the highest priority on the international agenda. Excellencies, colleagues, last year at the 48th session of the Human Rights Council, we made history. In that session, the Maldives was a proud lead co-sponsor of the landmark resolution 4813, which recognized the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment as a human right for the first time. The resolution also calls on governments to continue to discuss the issue at the UN General Assembly. By recognizing this right, the General Assembly could catalyze more ambitious and coordinated action to protect the environment. While we seek to accelerate climate action, it is important to note the critical need to provide the requisite resources to address the growing environmental challenges. In this regard, the lack of adequate funding and the delay of the global financing targets for developing countries is a reality that needs to be highlighted. A debt crisis threatens developing countries who lack the financial reserves to implement a greener and more resilient recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. National governments and all relevant stakeholders, including the private sector, need to review the existing financial architecture and develop a comprehensive approach to mobilize commitments for climate financing. Achieving these targets is crucial to ensure that the right to a healthy environment is fulfilled. We reiterate our belief that a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is integral to the full enjoyment of human rights. The report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, released in February this year, urges for more concerted effort at the multilateral front. As the report highlights, the science is clear. Human-induced climate change is causing dangerous and widespread disruption in nature and affecting the lives of billions of people around the world. Despite efforts to reduce the risks, people and ecosystems least able to cope are being hardest hit. SIDS, small island developing states, suffer disproportionately from the damaging impacts of climate change and have been advocating for at least a decade for the establishment of 1.5 degrees Celsius as an upper limit for global average temperature increase. The IPCC report highlights that limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius rather than 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels would make it much easier to achieve many aspects of sustainable development. This key finding underlines the urgency for climate action, focusing on equity and justice. The report is clear and underlines the fact that we must redouble our joint efforts to limit global warming. Small island developing states like the Maldives are increasingly vulnerable to climate change and its negative impacts. In that regard, we want to lead by example. That is why we have put forward an ambitious plan to reach net zero emissions by 2030, which we hope to achieve with international support. As part of our renewable energy strategy, we are also partnering with International Renewable Agency to promote renewable technologies. In addition, the government has prohibited the importing, manufacturing, and marketing of single-use plastics within the country. We are implementing targeted, holistic climate policies in recognition of the existential threat that climate change poses to the Maldives. We are also proud to note that Maldives is the first developing country to phase out HCFCs, a milestone we have achieved 10 years ahead of the Montreal Protocol target. Maldives, as a small island developing state, aims to build on these initiatives and continue to implement policies and activities to protect our environment and safeguard our environmental rights. In conclusion, let me take this opportunity to highlight the importance of international solidarity, inclusivity, and cooperation to save our planet and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Adequate funding, technology transfer, political commitment, and partnership lead to more effective climate change adaptation and mitigation policies and programs. The time is now for global action. Let us work together to leave no one behind and help to achieve the aspirations of all for a better, more sustainable paradigm of development and realize everyone's right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. Let me wish everyone a very constructive discussion today and wish everyone all the best. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, and we very much look forward, also given the leading role that Maldives now plays in the General Assembly, to the developments in New York in this respect. And thank you very much for your intervention. I would like now to but also that we do have a video statement from David Bowie. David, he couldn't be here today with us because I understand he's on the road, but he did record a message. He's a special rapporteur on human rights and the environment, of course. So over to Diana for the video message.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, I'm Dr. David Boyd, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment, and I'm really delighted to be joining you during World Environment Week. We live in a time of great peril and great promise. A triple global environmental crisis of climate disaster, biodiversity collapse, and pervasive pollution, but at the same time, historic recognition of everyone's right to live in a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment by the Human Rights Council last October, and with a resolution coming from the UN General Assembly in the weeks ahead. Indeed, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said that he will be traveling to Stockholm plus 50 this week in order to urge states to embrace and act upon everyone's right to live in a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. We have spent 5 decades debating the existence of this fundamental human right. That debate is now over, and it is time to move on with the even greater challenge of implementation. And this is a time of great excitement about the right to a healthy environment. We have the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which includes references to the right. We have the proposed UN Treaty on Businesses and Human Rights, which includes an explicit reference to the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. We have the proposal for a new protocol to the European Convention on Human Rights to recognize everyone's right to a healthy environment. We have preliminary discussions in Africa and Asia about potential regional agreements similar to the Aarhus Convention and the Escazú Treaty. We have the proposal for a new global treaty to deal with the scourge of plastic pollution. And we also have a forthcoming case at the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, which will be the first time that court tackles directly the issue of pollution and the right to a healthy environment in a very terrible situation involving a lead smelter in Peru called La Oroya that has poisoned literally generations of children. We live in a time where scientists are telling us we need to make transformative changes in order to achieve a sustainable future. And the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment can be a very powerful tool in catalyzing transformative changes. And it's very exciting to look around the world at how people are already using this tool. In Chile, they are drafting a new constitution which will not only recognize the right to a healthy environment, but if ratified, will be the first constitution in the world to specifically refer to the right to breathe clean air. And the right to a healthy environment has been used in a number of countries with great success recently in holding governments accountable for improving air quality in South Africa, in Chile, in Indonesia, and others. With respect to water pollution, the Inter-American Commission has issued several recent judgments of great importance, requiring states to address water pollution because of violations of the right to a healthy environment. When it comes to nature and biodiversity, we have increased number of states that are phasing out both highly hazardous pesticides and the bee-killing neonicotine pesticides. In terms of biodiversity and healthy ecosystems, recent judgments in South Africa and Argentina protecting endangered marine mammals, especially whales, from the impacts of offshore oil and gas development. As well, we know that a safe climate is a critical part of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. And I was delighted to read about a recent set of events in Ecuador where a group of 9 young girls used their right to a healthy environment to stop the flaring of oil and gas near their communities in Ecuador. And finally, the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment also includes non-toxic environments. And as my recent report to the Human Rights Council emphasized, there are simply too many sacrifice zones around the world where people are being exposed to horrible levels of pollution and toxic substances. And we are seeing progress on cleaning up some of these sacrifice zones in Canada, in Zambia, in the United States, in Chile, in Argentina. And so the challenge that we face is to take this tool, the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, and really make sure that it gets into as many people's hands as possible so that it can fulfill its destiny of helping us to achieve a just and sustainable future where we all live in harmony with nature on this beautiful blue-green planet. Thank you very much, and I look forward to continued collaboration.
Well, thanks to David for this really inspiring statement. And with this, I'd like to give the floor to Astrid Puentes. And Astrid is an environmental lawyer, and she's an environmental defender with immense experience in advancing environmental rights in the Latin American Caribbean region and also at the global level. And I think Astrid and I have known each other for, 25 years? I was just trying to calculate in my head. And it's very much a pleasure, Astrid. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mariana, and thank you very much to everybody, and especially for this invitation and the Geneva Environmental Network for organizing this very important event. It is for me a big honor to share a few thoughts about the importance of the recognition of the right to a healthy environment by the Human Rights Council and the big opportunity and the important step that we are looking forward that the General Assembly will take hopefully in a few weeks. And thinking about this and a lot of information we already have heard about the importance of the recognition of the right to a healthy environment. And I wanted to share a few elements about this, starting, of course, from reality. We have to think and remind ourselves that the recognition to a healthy environment is very important because of the world that we are living today. And as it has been said several times, because of the triple crises that we are facing, the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, and the pollution crisis, just call for this recognition that, of course, is not something that we would like to see in the law, but the important thing is that it will be applicable actually in reality. One other element, and being from the Global South and specifically from Latin America is key, is the importance of the protection of environmental defenders. And we have seen, unfortunately, that in the Global South, several countries are already facing a very difficult situation for environmental defenders. And one thing that is key is being able to advance the right to a healthy environment and the recognition that the work of environmental defenders are doing. The second element that I wanted to highlight is in terms of inequality, because once we already have seen all these numbers and talk about the triple crisis that we're facing in the world, when we talk about this crisis, we also talk about inequalities, because people, indigenous peoples, including and communities, are the ones that are suffering the most from all of these crises, and mostly are also the ones that are least responsible for all of these crises and are suffering disproportionately in all their human rights. And that's one of the key elements that is important to highlight, and also needs one of the reasons why we need this recognition. Another element that is difficult and even painful to recognize, but is real, is that the current solutions that we're having are not enough and are not being sufficient to solve all of these crises and to protect our human rights and the environment. And we are seeing that, and we heard already from the ambassador of Maldives, all the numbers from the signs from the IPCC and also other signs that are reflecting that what we already have is not enough to protect both our rights and nature and the environment. So one of the things that is key is to be able to join all of this and to be able to advance solutions and change course and implement the improvements that we are not having. The fourth element that I wanted to share also why this is important, and we saw that, and I was honored to be part of that, the global call that also was mentioned before about more than 1,350 organizations and movements worldwide calling to the Human Rights Council to recognize this right. And this is definitely not only a list of a lot of names, it's a call from the territories, from the ground, so that the UN and now the General Assembly has a great opportunity to recognize this right so that it can be a tool that can be used in all of the territories. Because one of the elements that we are seeing is that human rights and the environment, unfortunately, have been seen as two separate planets, while we have only one planet. And we have seen for 15 years that the human rights laws, frameworks, and even institutions sometimes are seen separately than the environmental ones. And this is something that I think that is key that we can advance, because in the territories and in the ground, we know that we have one single planet that is deeply connected. And so one of the key things about this recognition is be able to advance and to be able to put in practice one of the key principles, or the key principles from the human rights, that is the interdependency, the indivisibility, and the universality of all human rights. And this is something that we see constantly with the environment, that is a pending step that we need for the recognition of the right to a healthy environment. That is something that has helped significantly in several countries and regions where the human right to a healthy environment has been recognized. So in general, and to summarize, the reality is something that calls for this recognition. This is the time to do it, especially because it will give us additional tools to embrace solutions and especially advance and decrease the inequalities and injustices that we are seeing, be able to have other tools that in reality environmental defenders, communities, indigenous peoples, Afro-descendant peoples, women, children, youth can use to effectively protect our human rights and be able to advance this. And we really trust in the General Assembly to be able to advance and make the historic step to concrete this recognition in the few weeks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Astrid. I would now like to give the floor to Benjamin Schachter, who is the Human Rights Officer and also Environment Team Lead at the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And Ben has been sort of championing the environmental rights work within that secretariat, and also for a number of years in the climate process. So Ben, over to you.
Thank you, Mariana, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a privilege to be here on behalf of the UN Human Rights Office. A lot of what I could say, I think, has already been said by the excellent interventions that preceded me. I want to just pick up on a few points and emphasize some of the priorities for the office and some of the ways that we look at this moment in time that we're in. And I want to thank as well Switzerland and Maldives for their leadership, along with the other members of the core group in bringing Human Rights Council Resolution 4813 to fruition. We hope that that's not the end and that the process continues at the GA, as the resolution invites the GA to consider the matter. But we also want to make very clear that we all have the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, irrespective of what happens in these bodies, because human rights are indivisible, inalienable, interdependent, and they're things that we inherently possess by virtue of being human beings. The act of recognition triggers a lot of potential and catalyzes a lot of opportunities for implementation. And so the act of recognition is really important. And HRC Resolution 4813 was a fantastic step in that direction. But we all know, and inherently recognize that we have a human right to a healthy environment. And nobody can take that from us. So I wanted to say that, and I also wanted to talk a little bit about Stockholm. Obviously, we're at Stockholm plus 50. Mariana read the quote, I would have, related to sort of the origins of the idea of the right to a healthy environment. And certainly the Stockholm Declaration has been an important inspiration for the work of the office. But efforts to realize the vision of Stockholm have been uneven and in many cases insufficient. That's why we're here in a triple planetary crisis, which others have already described. In some countries, strong laws and policies backed by robust accountability mechanisms protect the environment more effectively than in others where such protections are lacking. But in some of these countries, they're essentially exporting their environmental harms and impacts. So there's no country that's doing enough. There's no government that's doing enough to protect the environment. And all of us as individuals also have a lot more work to do. The last 50 years have revealed more than ever the global nature of environmental crises, the negative human rights consequences that disproportionately affect those already in vulnerable situations, and how within and across countries, critical environmental protections are not equally enjoyed by all. And this has spurred a vast movement for change. You heard talk of the call by civil society and indigenous peoples representative organizations for recognition of the human right to a healthy environment, the Human Rights Council resolution. It is a movement, and it's a movement that we can't afford to let lose momentum. We have to keep going, and we have to move toward implementation. OHCHR, for years, working with Unep and other partners, has been working to support this movement, recognition of the right, but more importantly, its implementation. We stand up for rights holders around the world, demanding environmental justice and the fulfillment of their right to a healthy environment. But there are a lot of obstacles, including entrenched special interests, placing profit before people, unsustainable consumption and production, and inadequate legal and accountability frameworks. There have been, as we've already heard, successes, including integration of human rights in the Paris Agreement on climate change, adoption in Latin America and the Caribbean of a new legally binding agreement on participation, access to information, and access to justice in environmental matters. Changes in the way that modern science has brought us an improved understanding of environmental challenges, and that includes, really importantly, social sciences and an understanding of both the qualitative and quantitative analysis that's needed to adequately address environmental harms. And you see this in the most recent report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, Working Group 2, Sixth Assessment Report, where the report very clearly states that human rights-based approaches lead to more effective outcomes. So we have a lot to do. We've already done a lot. We have a lot to be happy about, but we're nowhere near where we need to be to protect human rights from the triple planetary crisis. And Stockholm Plus 50 represents a critical moment for a continuation of the discussion. We have a roadmap for action, the 2030 Agenda, the Paris Agreement, and other instruments, and human rights law represent an agreement by states and people to a transformative vision for people-centered development. We just have to realize it. We have to put the resources behind it that are needed, and we have to really move toward strengthening partnerships, interagency coordination within the UN system, the Secretary General's call to action for human rights, our common agenda, and the work of the UN Environment Management Group are all increasingly focusing on issues related to human rights and the environment and bringing the UN system together to work in this area. And that's where I want to put in a quick plug for a side event that OHCHR and partners are co-organizing at Stockholm Plus 50. called Coming Together for Healthy People on a Healthy Planet, the UN system's commitment to advancing the human right to a healthy environment. This is an event that will take place on the 2nd of June at Stockholm Plus 50 and bring together some of the voices you've heard here today, some new voices, voices from across the UN system, youth and indigenous peoples representatives, among others, to talk about some of these critical issues. So in closing, I want to just say that, you know, we need to, as I've stated before, move toward implementation and integrating human rights more effectively in environmental processes. David mentioned the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. There are a number of references to human rights and the right to a healthy environment in the draft negotiating text. Those are all in brackets. And I think for states to be coherent and consistent with the positions they've taken, we need to get the brackets off of that language, and we need to have a biodiversity framework that respects, protects, and fulfills human rights. I could go across the board through the multilateral environmental agreements and the negotiating processes. Mariana mentioned the UNFCCC one, where OHCHR has been engaged for a long time. But in the interest of time, I'll stop there and jump to another area, which is national policy planning, and just flag, again, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to integrate human rights and nationally determined contributions under the UNFCCC, national biodiversity strategies and action plans, to really walk the talk of the human right to a healthy environment and a human rights-based approach to the triple planetary crisis. And all of that, of course, will require more effective international cooperation and mobilization of resources. And I think this is the very difficult and challenging work we have ahead of us, but that we've laid the groundwork to make substantial progress on that. And in closing, I want to wish everybody a happy World Environment Day.
Thank you very much, Ben. And well, effective implementation of rights also requires engagement of all sectors. And in this regard, the business community plays a very important role. And it's my pleasure to give the floor to Sierra Leader, who is an advocacy strategist with the B Team. And the B Team is an initiative that focuses on sustainability, equality, and accountability in business sector leadership. And Sierra, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. It is a pleasure to join you for this important discussion. As you mentioned, and by way of introduction, the B Team is a global collective of business and civil society leaders who work to create new norms of corporate leadership today for a better tomorrow. First, let me thank all of you who've shown such incredible leadership in attaining the recognition of the human right to a healthy environment so far. We are very proud of efforts to date, and we are excited about the continuing momentum towards the General Assembly. Still, we recognize the work that lies before us and fully understand the implications of recognizing and implementing the right, both in policy and in legal tracks. And we also understand that there is still a need for continued support ahead of tabling this resolution at the General Assembly. We believe that this movement is both timely and necessary, and I would highlight the importance of global alignment on this matter. Before last year's initiative for a resolution at the Human Rights Council, the business voice had largely been silent on this issue with no clear position, and in some cases, this was even taken as an indication of opposition. As the B Team, by virtue of the work that we do, our leaders are committed to raising human rights and environmental standards. And in partnership with our leaders, Business for Nature and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, the business statement calling for adoption of the resolution was designed to show the support of business for universal recognition of the human right and to complement existing statements from civil society and UN agencies. The business statement today has over 50 signatories, including major multinationals such as Unilever, Salesforce, Safaricom, Natura, Allianz, H&M, Adidas, and Inca Group, many of which are names that you may recognize. I must note that there was no negative feedback from companies when we were doing outreach. Some were not yet ready to sign on publicly, but overall, we did hear positive support for the resolution and for this work. We believe that a concerned business voice on this issue is critical and can make a difference, hence the business statement, and that beyond UN recognition, business will also play a key role and be a key partner in implementing this right. The rationale for business support of this right is clear, as business is a stakeholder in both healthy environments and in thriving communities. There is an increasing recognition of business as a major player in society, not just in economics. And on the flip side, business relies on natural capital and healthy societies to be able to operate sustainably in the long term. Beyond what my fellow panelists have already mentioned, recognizing this right at the UN General Assembly will function as a global tool to protect our natural capital and create the conditions through which our planet and business can sustainably thrive and prosper. The business case is clear. Businesses rely on nature for resources such as food, fiber, minerals, and building materials, ecosystem services such as pollination of crops, water filtration, waste decomposition, climate sequestration, and climate regulation, as well as healthy and prosperous societies that give us consumers, customers, and workforces. Business is also increasingly recognizing the connections between the environment and social aspects such as human rights. The concept of a just transition is a clear example of this and has been at the forefront of conversations about how climate change impacts the most vulnerable, for example, in the energy transition. It will be important to embed respect for people and the principle of the right to a healthy environment into ongoing action and initiatives, rather than duplicating or reinventing efforts. The realization of targets contained within the Sustainable Development Goals and other major agreements requires the steadfast commitment of the business community, and we are rising to that challenge. As my fellow panelists today have mentioned, the human right to a healthy environment intersects with numerous other framings of action to protect both the environment and human rights. There is overlap between environmental and social concerns, environmental and climate risks, and wider operational risk assessments for business. The human right to a healthy environment is part of a new social contract and a refreshed framing of climate objectives, and will also be a key tool in engaging with the new climate-focused generation, today's youth and generations to come. The Sustainable Development Goals, the UN Guiding Principles, due diligence processes, both mandatory and voluntary, are all key to ensuring a sustainable, resilient future for all. In particular, UN General Assembly recognition of the right would create a systemic integration to link and anchor different actors in the rights and environmental spaces. Collaboration with government experts, civil society partners, and local expert advisors such as human and land defenders is an important method to account for impacts on rights holders and stakeholders and to engage in dialogue. Practical implementation is also at the forefront of business thinking, and there is a role for business in setting up sustainable practices and precedents. This includes due diligence practices, circular business models, leading social and cultural tone setting for the climate generation, as well as providing expertise and practical knowledge during the development of guidance and regulations. Business should also be a partner in collaborative action alongside governments and civil society. Businesses who have taken action in advance of government policies can be consulted for expertise, business knowledge, and tools for respecting human rights, now including the right to a healthy environment, can demonstrate best practices as an example to other businesses and to the public sector where applicable. Knowledge sharing by those who have already tried various practices will help all actors to advance and progress from existing learnings. It is beneficial to share both challenges and opportunities, as well as tried and tested methods, whether or not they were successful. One important method, due diligence, is a crucial element of ensuring respect of the human right to a healthy environment. Knowing the practices that go into producing goods and services that are used along the supply and value chain is a foundational step towards taking action for respect and to ensuring prevention of harms well in advance of remedying abuses. I should note that the burden of costs and efforts to respect this right should not be passed from large companies to SMEs, whether in the value chain or in working relationships. Whether that means traditional partnerships, helping with SME capacity building, or sharing knowledge and lessons learned, all businesses have the responsibility to respect human rights, including this newly recognized right. Major convenings, such as Stockholm +50 and World Environment Day, are key opportunities to take stock of progress and engage for further action. I would recommend to look at and work with companies who have implemented progressive practices and policies to begin enshrining aspirations for future action. The time could not be more right for a rights-based approach to continue tackling the global climate crisis and to ensure respect for all people. A General Assembly resolution on the right to a healthy environment would serve as an important catalyst to protect global natural capital, and as I mentioned before, to create the conditions through which business and communities can thrive sustainably. We will continue to use the business voice to uplift these messages ahead of the UN General Assembly resolution and stand ready to support this process going forward. There will also be opportunities for companies to raise awareness around operationalization of respect for this right and to support domestic ratification for those countries who do not yet individually address this right outright. From a stakeholder perspective, General Assembly recognition would provide a universal impetus for action, as well as a tool for action. This recognition would be a globally agreed upon reason to respect the right to a healthy environment beyond the evident moral imperative, and would also be a tool by which to organize collective action and mobilize resources. General Assembly recognition of this right is also a mechanism for accountability. If actors, including business, do not respect this human right, this resolution will create another layer of accountability at which actors can and will have to face up to the consequences of harmful actions. Ultimately, the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is fundamental to the functioning of our businesses, our societies, and our economies. As our business statement says, and I hope it will be made available to you later, we are committed to this common work. We recognize and highlight that the realization of targets contained within the Sustainable Development Goals, the Convention on Biological Diversity, and the Paris Agreement requires the steadfast commitment of business, and we are rising to that challenge. We stand alongside states, civil society organizations, environmental defenders, and UN entities calling for General Assembly recognition of the right to a healthy and sustainable environment so that we can ensure no one is left behind in a just transition to an equitable, nature-positive, and carbon-neutral world. We wish to express our support for this forthcoming resolution and for future efforts to respect the human right to a healthy environment. And I offer thanks to you all for your commitment to serve the best interests of present and future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sierra. And with this, I want to recall what we've mentioned already, and that is this right is a lot about the future. And what we're doing today is in recognition of this right is about also very much rights of future generations. So it gives me a lot of pleasure to invite a representative from the youth community to talk about that. And I give the floor to Ms. Samia Shell, who is an environmental justice and human rights advocate and is also a student at the St. John's University School of Law in New York, and she's joining us, I believe, from New York. So Samia, the floor is yours.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm actually joining from my home state of Maryland, would be joining from New York, but I appreciate the conveners of this event, member states, fellow panelists, civil society, businesses, and individuals in this audience for being here today to champion the right to a healthy environment. We understand that our present is dire. This week, we continue to receive warnings about rising temperatures, what inaction will do to us, and that our fate is nearly sealed. I'm not here to discuss the present. I'm here on behalf of our future. The ancestors of my people, who in their present suffered incomprehensible brutality and immorality, did not succumb to despair and hopelessness. Instead, they engaged in radical collaboration, nurtured seemingly impossible dreams, and had faith that one day things would be different. They persevered because they knew the generations to come after them deserved to live in a future of dignity and self-determination. Because of their endurance, I am here today. I and countless others across this planet are here to let it be known that each of us deserves a clean, safe, and healthy environment. We recognize that we are in the midst of three interwoven crises: climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. And in face of these challenges, we too possess the courage and motivation necessary to secure a livable and better future for our children, youth, and future generations. Children and youth have played an instrumental role in protecting our right to a healthy environment and in catalyzing radical change for our planet and people. Youth continue to bring actions in their national courts and in regional and international forums to assert our rights to life and dignity. Youth are challenging the very constitutions and statutes that make up the fabric of our societies and are holding our governments to account for their duties arising under the Paris Agreement and other conventions to protect our rights to a clean, safe, and healthy environment today and for future generations. For instance, youth from the Pacific are presently afflicted by the stark reality of climate change. They have been diligently and tenaciously engaged in protecting their rights and those of future generations in their campaign to obtain an advisory opinion on climate change from the International Court of Justice. Children and youth are also ensuring that businesses adhere to principles of corporate responsibility, cease greenwashing, and play their parts in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, pollution, and biodiversity loss. Children and youth have been and continue to push for the momentum needed to compel governments to make the required decisions that will mark our shift to a new way of living and cooperating together. They are striking in their home countries, missing school, surpassing immense hurdles to attend international climate conferences, and standing on the front lines of their communities to protect their environments. Many youth are unjustifiably paying the price for their activism, facing persecution by their governments or other business interests that have even gone so far as to end their lives. Yet in the midst of all of this, the youth remain focused on a shared goal. My apologies. That of a prosperous, sustainable, and harmonious future for all of us. While children and youth have met this unprecedented task for advocating for all people, living and non-living things, the stark inequality of this burden compared to the fact that we are not responsible for creating these issues must not be overlooked. Children and youth struggle to gain recourse for wrongs infringing our environmental rights, to access crucial negotiations, and are largely unrepresented in governments exercising the authority to determine our futures. Yet, children and youth simultaneously suffer the largest effects of environmental degradation, pollution, biodiversity loss, and climate change. Studies tell us time and again that these crises place the health of children and youth disproportionately at risk and restrict our opportunities to learn and play, especially for children and youth living in urban settings. Climate change is also actively depriving many children and youth, especially Indigenous children and youth, from pursuing traditional livelihoods, stewarding ancestral homelands, consuming traditional foods, and otherwise passing cultural traditions and knowledge to future generations. Adopting the right to a healthy environment will allow for redress of current harms, increase children and youth's access to participation in decision-making processes, and will prevent further harm from affecting our growing human family. Almost 50 years ago, youth were present at Stockholm and helped to enshrine the body of law that we now appreciate today to protect environmental rights. With Stockholm again ahead of us, along with World Environment Day, it is prime time to recall our forward-looking wisdom that tomorrow things can be different, they will be different. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. And that sort of concludes the interventions from the panel. And I would like to open the floor for comments or questions from the participants in the room, and also encourage those online to please post your questions in the chat, and we'll try to take them up as they come in. So the floor is open to colleagues in the room, online. And perhaps while you're reflecting, I'll read one of the comments, one comment that was received online from Lilian Cora, who supported David's message on the pollution, but also calls on other UN agencies, particularly sectoral agencies like ILO, UNICEF, FAO, and WHO, to take active action, as well as governments also in the areas of health, and at the next World Health Assembly of the WHO. That provides a great opportunity to raise the issue, proposing a resolution to support the right to a healthy environment. That was a comment received online. And I come back to the room. Oh, there is a question, please.
Thank you very much, Pascal Delisle from the EU delegation to the UN here in Geneva. Thank you very much, first of all, to Geneva Environmental Network and to all the panelists for a great series of presentations. It's very clear from all what you've said that now the challenge is implementation, is action. Since HRC adopted this resolution, trade-offs have not disappeared, special interests have not disappeared. So basically, I think we're all asking ourselves the same question. When we say catalyze, action and all of that, how do you see the different duty bearers? How do you see the role of the different layers in policy making? What is the most kind of challenging, and probably where do you see the most hope for translating this newly recognized right into action? That's a very general question, I'm sorry.
Thanks very much. That's an excellent question. I'm asking myself that same question. So I would give the floor to the panelists, both in the room and online, who would like to take up this quite significant challenge in the question, but a very interesting one. So this is, how do you see the role and what specific actions are needed from the different duty bearers, from the different stakeholders? What's the most challenging and what gives you most hope? Ben, please.
Happy to start. That's a huge question. And our office has dedicated substantial time and analysis to sort of deriving the basic human rights obligations that apply in the context of different environmental situations. So we've done our best to articulate a lot of, the general answers to these questions. What kinds of human rights obligations apply in the context of biodiversity loss? What kind of human rights obligations apply in the context of climate change? And that work is available, of course, on our website. We've got a lot of key message documents. I think there are a few main themes that we see cross-cutting across, biodiversity, pollution, and climate change as posing the real challenges for action and implementation. And those include resource mobilization, awareness and knowledge and capacity, which isn't unrelated to resource mobilization. And they include, to a great extent, failures related to participation, access to information, and access to justice and protection of environmental human rights defenders. So, there are so many things that need to be done and so many things that we have to do. But fundamentally, if we're not including the voices of the people affected in decision-making processes, if we're not ensuring that there's an accountability mechanism that works so that people who are harmed by environmental crises have some recourse, then we're not going to be able to address this crisis. And I guess one of the other sort of broader challenges and really just observations about human nature is that we are able to conceptualize and understand in the abstract that this is a crisis, but I don't think we really realize that we're in it already. And I think the challenge there is that it's not real to enough people. It's real to the people who are already being affected and seeing their lives change, but we need to make it real to everybody. And there's something there about inequalities as well, right? And the fact that the people and governments with the most power and capacity for change may not be experiencing the impacts of environmental harms the same way that others are. And so we need to address that sort of divide in our work to reduce and tackle inequalities. So that's the first stab at it.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Ben. That's a lot to deal with in the societal change as well, which is a big challenge. I would like to give the floor to, hold on a second, I have to Sierra, who's would like to take the floor and perhaps try to address this question.
Yes, thank you. I have a very brief, a slightly more technical answer regarding next steps and implementation. I think that another key piece of the puzzle will be global shift towards standards for corporate disclosure on environmental, social, and governance issues. I think the nascent movement towards mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence is also an important one. And in both of those, we'll see that first knowing what is happening is a very, very important step. That's why I brought up due diligence earlier. And I think that having a common standard as well as a level playing field for regulations for everybody to be operating in the same way is also very important. I'm sure that a lot of you have heard about the new initiative of the International Sustainability Standards Board. I think their work will be very, very important in making sure that there is an information flow on topics like this. I hope that's helpful.
It is, and very concrete, so thanks very much for that. Just want to check if there are any other those wishing to answer and willing to answer. And if not, I would like to ask a question for Daniel Magro, who's asking it online, and it's specifically addressed to Samia, but also any other panelists who would like to answer and would like to elaborate on the reaction between the right to a healthy environment and environmental justice, because this issue of inequality has been brought up by many of the speakers. So I would like to first perhaps give the floor to Samia and then to anybody who would like to take up that issue.
Sure. Hello, Dan. Definitely the right to a healthy environment is something that I have mentioned before, but the way I see it is that it's the baseline or the foundation of the concept of environmental justice and as an extension of climate justice. And so if we don't believe that people are entitled to a healthy environment or a clean and safe environment, then it is impossible to, in practice, implement or secure environmental justice and climate justice for all people. And so the important pieces of environmental justice is that concept of inequity, of burdens being disproportionately held on some, while benefits are being disproportionately enjoyed by others. Another prong is participation in decision-making processes, and being able to exercise sovereignty over your own community and the things that affect your local environments. And then the third prong is access to justice, access to redress and recourse for current and also past wrongs. And so ensuring that we have a right to a healthy environment, that it's enshrined in the law, that it's something that's actionable, will protect the ability to, in actual courts or in other forums, to secure environmental justice. And in terms of climate justice, the idea that some countries are bearing the burdens of the climate crisis as opposed to others that are not bearing those burdens, but are instead contributing disproportionately. The same flows there, that climate justice is possible as a result of acknowledging that everyone is entitled to a healthy environment.
Thank you very much. And are there any other views on the matter? If no, and again, that was a really comprehensive answer as well. I'd like to move to the next question, and that's from Sebastian Dick from CL, who is addressing it to the representatives of member states present. So I'm looking to my left. And he's pointing out that last week, the UN Secretary General stressed again the need for the General Assembly to take urgent action in response to the resolution adopted last year at the Human Rights Council so as to facilitate implementation. Do the states representatives present today expect the General Assembly to take action before the end of the ongoing session of the Assembly, building upon the leadership of the core group here in Geneva.
Thank you very much. It's very difficult to give an exact answer to that question, but I understand from my colleagues in New York that they are working on a draft now of the resolution. So we are hoping that as soon as possible that they would try to pass it. We would hope it would be before the current session ends. But of course, it's a long and difficult negotiation in the GA because the difference between the Human Rights Council and the GA is that, of course, everyone in the GA is a voting member. In the Human Rights Council, of course, is the council that only votes. So the negotiations are likely to be much more complex and I hope not too long drawn out because time is of the essence. And I think everyone understands that we need to keep the momentum, and therefore it is very important that this resolution at the GA sees the light of day as soon as possible.
Yes, I can just add, I have exactly the same information from New York as Ambassador Ahmed. What we can just say is also, I think the current stage beyond the negotiation is very important to have a thorough outreach activity. And we've seen in Glion, we have seen from some of the panelists today also the support of many states, of civil society, of business. I think Sierra said that very eloquently before, that have shown their readiness, their support to assist the core group. And so I think it's important to reach out to them to see how this support, I mean, how we can harness the best possible this support from all those positive voices. And at the same time, as I said in my opening remarks, I mean, we still have those that are how to say that still have questions about the scope of the right. So I think it's still the time now to continue our discussions and outreach with those states and try to try to convince them and have ongoing further discussions with them. So I think it goes really into both sides.
Thank you very much. And I would like to take the last question for this session before we come to the concluding remarks. And I understand, Yves, you've got a question, so please go ahead.
Yes, well, first, thank you very much for this event, and congratulations for organizing it, because it is a pretty tough time with all what's going on between Stockholm and Dakar and so on. So it's quite an important moment. And I just want to take the opportunity of having the ambassador of the Maldives with us to say how much we all on the NGO community wish that the confirmation or the acknowledgement that the UNGA will be taken under your country's chairmanship, because it definitely would carry a very strong meaning. It is time, and we should not wait for the things to go on and on and on. We need for this to be adopted very quickly, and we need for this to be adopted really now. So we look forward for that, and we really hope that all of the core group is really on that side and going forward, so that we get something very quickly in the coming months. And actually, if I'm correct, the NGOs in New York have asked the core group for a meeting on the 9th of July. So this will be probably a very good opportunity for all of us. We hope also for the Geneva-based community to be able to follow this discussion and have a common strategy between the core group in New York and the NGOs who are in New York working on this, and also with us on our side. I just wanted to add also another element that could perhaps be interesting in the discussion that we have developed here on the following steps. In the Latin American continent, there has been some really interesting developments, and I think the universal side, should be also looking at the regional aspects. And I was wondering if perhaps our experts from the region could tell us and give us some of the most recent development that happened at the level of the Inter-American Court on Human Rights, because it's really interesting to see today how the very, in a way, classical human rights court are doing very important progress in defining what are the human rights in the climate change context, but also as the right to a healthy and sustainable environment. So it could be very useful for our discussions. Once again, thank you very much, and we look forward for the success in the coming weeks of the core group in New York.
Thank you, Eve. And yes, it would be really interesting to also see how the developments here in Geneva fit into the discussions in New York, because there is obviously a very strong community here that advances this issue, and that link is incredibly important. I would close the questions right now, but I would like to give the opportunity to the panelists to perhaps give 30 seconds to 1 minute closing remarks from what you've heard today on the key takeaway messages that you think our audience here and online would like or would need to take back from this discussion. And perhaps I would go in the same order that the speakers were intervening. Ambassador Bellman, if you would like to start.
Well, thank you. And well, I think, well, to be very, very short, just I think that today's discussion has shown again this really the broad support that we enjoy, and I think that's the moment now to capitalize on that, to have this outreach to civil society, to business, but also as was said, I think to youth. We had our youth representative. This is important to the regions also. To continue really on an inclusive basis this discussion on our way forward.
Thank you, Ambassador Ahmed.
Thank you very much. It has been a great pleasure to be a part of this panel and a part of this discussion. I think a very, very important issues have been raised by my fellow panelists, as well as from the general audience. We have underscored the importance of environmental rights for achieving sustainable development. We have also underscored the importance of the interlinkages between environmental rights and other development issues, particularly focusing on issues of justice, environmental justice, and environmental rights have been highlighted. And I think this is a very important aspect. And of course, the issue of youth, because this whole issue is all about the future, not only about the present. I think the participation of youth and the implications of what we are doing now in terms of passing the resolutions on environmental rights, on the prospects for their future, I think have been highlighted. And that has been a very important aspect from my perspective on this discussion. And of course, we all hope that a resolution at the GA will pass soon, and that would further consolidate the right to a safe, healthy, and sustainable environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ben, over to you.
Thank you. I think that I want to emphasize we all do have this right, and states and businesses have obligations and responsibilities with respect to the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. And we need to move toward, and it's a cliche, but it's the language that we use, but it's not the action we take towards transformative change. And that's bigger than just, talking about action and making nice statements and changing policies. It's actually looking at the structural inequalities that lead to unsustainable consumption and production and addressing them. It's looking at the way we live our lives and the way that our current system perpetuates problems. And so one example I'll throw out there before concluding is if you look at COVID-19 recovery and response, a vast majority of that did not go to green industry. Yet we're always talking about just transition and green transition. What better moment in time did we have than when we were mobilizing huge amounts of resources to pursue actual transformative change than that? And we didn't take it. And in fact, a lot of businesses that are environmentally destructive received very large investments or bailouts or support. And I think we see that, it's a pattern that's in some ways repeated, the financial crisis in 2008. So I think we need to move toward that transformative change we're speaking of and the vision that's outlined in the 2030 agenda. And to do that, we need the action to really back up the words about the right to a healthy environment and sustainable development and human rights.
Thank you. Astrid, please.
Thank you very much. And to echo what we already have said, I invite us to think about these objections, because we do know that everything is not perfect today, and to think about even when the UN Declaration in the 40s was accepted, there was not the specific definition of all the rights that were included that, but time made it better. And so if we are waiting for the perfect definition of the scope and the concept of the human right to a healthy environment, we're never going to advance to this key recognition of a right that is uniting and reminded us that we're connected with nature. And most of all, if facing of all of these crises that we have seen, unfortunately seeing that the actions today are not effective enough, the recognition to of the right to a healthy environment is a key element so that we can have different solutions finally and different results to what we're having. There was a question about the responsibility, and I think that is key to remember that there is an inequality in the all of these contributions for the crises, and that's why we need the recognition of this right to actually be able to embrace and advance the differentiated responsibilities of both states, actors, and people. So we really look forward, and we're happy to support the core group and to help from the Latin American expertise and experience about how the universal right can actually be a tool that will help us advance several solutions that are needed.
Thank you, Astrid. Over to Sierra.
Thank you. I'll try to keep these very short. My key takeaways are apt following Benjamin's remarks. And although I can't speak to COVID-era financial policies, I would like to say that business, and particularly the signatories of the business statement, are a key partner and an ally in ensuring respect for human rights and in taking action towards a healthy environment and all action that comes at the intersection of those two. Recognition by the UN General Assembly is key to enabling the mobilization of resources and action, and it will further progress to achievement of the SDGs. And finally, as Mariana and Benjamin have already referenced, it is noted in the Stockholm Declaration that not only do we have the right to a healthy environment, but we also have a responsibility to protect and improve the environment for present and future generations. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Samia, please.
Yes, I want to emphasize as we leave here today that children and youth are living in reliance on the decisions that are made today. And our realities will be shaped by what we do and how we proceed forward. And so understanding the reliance and the trust that is there, I think we have a duty to make the changes that are necessary to secure a stable future for all of us, thinking not just one generation or two generations, but even 7 generations ahead, what would we like this planet to look like and be like for them? What kind of lives would we like our future generations to enjoy? And I think that that reality, that philosophy of where we are going for humanity, for nature, is one that is going to be radically different than what we have experienced in recent centuries. And that is a beautiful thing that we have the opportunity to shape today. So I do welcome the adoption of this right to a healthy environment to protect future generations, to secure our rights today, and to make sure that we can achieve environmental and climate justice for everyone.
Thank you. My takeaways are 6 words: urgency, momentum, General Assembly resolution as a catalyzer, and implementation. That's pretty much concludes the excellent discussion today. Thank you so much to everybody. I want to also use this opportunity to mention an event that we're organizing tomorrow. It's a 24-hour marathon celebrating environmental rule of law. It's on the screen there. You can also find it on the website. And there are sessions, including in some regions, that goes 24 hours, moving from region to region and time zone to time zone, with 90-minute sessions in different regions. And in Europe, we're talking at 10 o'clock in the morning about the role of environmental law in addressing climate crisis. And at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we're focusing on the pan-European region and what we have done and are going to do with transboundary environmental issues through law and treaties in this region. So I invite you to join those sessions. And thank you so much to everybody, and have a wonderful World Environment Day.